Are you a dark dreamer? It is said that to best enjoy the light, you must first explore the heart and soul of the darkness. We are the artists who create in the shadows, whose dreams are designed to become your reality. I'm Stanley Wiater. Welcome to my world of the dark fantastic. Welcome to the world of dark dreamers. Are you a dark dreamer? Douglas Clegg most certainly is. Douglas Clegg is one of the leading examples of the current state of the art of horror fiction. The author of more than a dozen award-winning novels, Clegg has the rare ability to move seamlessly between classic, supernatural terrors and the most realistic of psychological horrors. His best-selling novels include such titles as Goat Dance, Breeder, The Children's Hour, Neverland, Mischief, The Halloween Man, You Come When I Call You, Naomi, The Nightmare Chronicles, and Purity. His novel, Bad Karma, which was published under the pseudonym Andrew Harper, is currently being made into a feature film starring Patsy Kensit. Clegg recently invited us to his home in New Jersey, where we discussed the joy of terror in art and life. When you were growing up, did you always secretly understand what it meant to be a dark dreamer?
Well, first, I think that dreams are essential to human existence. And to me, it means, since I'm a horror novelist, it means sort of the nightmare side of things, but dark dreamer is kind of a sweet way of approaching a nightmare. And I kind of like that idea, because I like the idea of embracing nightmares rather than running away from them. So I like the dark dreamer idea is that you're going into a slumber in which you'll go through an adventure of darkness. So that's what that means to me. Every day when I wake up, and I pretty much write as soon as I get out of bed, I feel like I'd rather live in a story than live in the real world. And it's not that the real world seems so hostile to me, but I just like the idea of horror stories so much that I'd rather be in them all the time. And having said that, I hope some psycho doesn't find me, tie me up, and torture me and say, see, you wanted to live in this. But in fact, I love a fictional world of stories, horror, dreams. And that's really what attracts me to writing, is that it really is escape for me. I get to write the stories I want to write, and I get to live in them while I'm writing it. And in fact, the big sadness to me is just when the story ends for me. When I finished a novel, and even though there are times when writing-wise, I think it's the worst novel I've ever written, I miss living in that world of that novel. So that's a big draw for me every day when I wake up. It's the first thing I think of. But I would say that something happened young enough to me to shock me out of wanting to live in the real world. So when I was about 9, I really started writing and drawing, and I wouldn't show anyone what I was doing. In fact, most of my friends did not know I wanted to be a writer or that I was much of an artist, because I kept it all to myself and I sort of hid it away. In fact, one of my favorite memories, my dad would hate this. My dad's such a wonderful guy, but he would hate this because one day he discovered my writings in my room, and he had gone through them, and he said, what's this? I really like this. And I was like, get away from that. And I had to tear it up. I was like, I have to tear it up now because it's been tainted. Someone has seen it. So no, it was like a secret from the world, which was a nice thing, because I lived in a family where there were a lot of secrets in the family, but there were not secrets from each other in the family, and I cherished any secret I could keep from my brothers and sister. Which was sort of selfish, but I think it was survivalist for me. I had to survive that family in a lot of ways. Oddly enough, I came from a fairly artistic family. My mother was an artist and very frustrated as an artist. She put it aside because she was from the generation that you raise kids. You put aside your work ambition if you're a woman and you raise kids. And that frustration came up a lot when I was growing up. Despite that, the idea of doing something that was considered artistic on any level was definitely squelched as I was getting older, and I had to hide it more and more. And I internalized that to such an extent that even in college, when I really had a lot of freedom, I hid it further and further and further, so that I went to college with very close friends. We've stayed very close, and they were all shocked when I wrote a novel and it was published, because they had no idea I had that ambition. I didn't exhibit it in college that much, but it was a good thing, and it really did save me. I think secrets from the world are good for people in the arts. You can't give everything to everybody. You have to hold some of it back. That's how I feel. It's probably a censorship on my own part, but there certainly are stories that I will never seek publication for, mainly because I believe they're for me. Suburbs of America are places of deceit, and I think they're places of lies, and I think that I'm the perfect product of that because I certainly grew up all across America in suburban homes. I did not live in one place my whole life. My dad was a naval officer, and we moved all over the place, but each time we landed in a very suburban neighborhood with very suburban values, but it would turn out down the street someone was a spy for the Russians and would get caught. Or down the street also there'd be a family where the father came home from work one day and shot the wife, the kids, the dog, and then himself. And those are all happening in suburban areas, not urban. It was not an urban world I lived in, and yet it still was very violent, but very secretive. And it's, to me, a spy is a perfect metaphor for the secretiveness of the suburbs. I felt like I was a spy, in many ways, living in a suburban community, because I felt I had a bigger imagination. I may not have, but I felt I did. And that feels dark. When you have a big imagination as a kid, I think it feels subversive. You feel different, you feel like you're an outcast, and for other reasons I felt that way too. And yet I also, in a daylight world, really lived it. I really loved the suburbs in a lot of ways too. I grew up as I got older, we lived on a lake, and I loved canoeing, I loved playing football with the other kids down at the beach of the lake, and had a great time. But meanwhile, I did have this sort of inner life of turmoil and nightmares that I absolutely loved.
Many of the other horror writers and horror personalities I've interviewed, when they were young people, they were basically afraid of everything, and at the same time afraid of nothing. Was this the case for you?
I feel like as a kid, I agree with that. I feel like as a kid, growing up, I was born in '58, and growing up in the 1960s in suburban America, it was a very scary time. And I think you'd have dinner at night and see incredible violence from Vietnam on television. And it was sort of part of the everyday world. Like at 6 o'clock, violence would be on TV, and it was the world. It wasn't some show being made up, it was the world. And then also I had huge fears of kidnapping, which sounds crazy now. But I think on television and in magazines, there were a lot of kidnappings. People were kidnapped, and the media just ate it up. And as a result, I just thought, what if I'm kidnapped? And then I'm killed. And then will my parents care? And then I built up absurd fears about that. But they seemed very real. And I kind of cherished them too, because that was an excitement in a very boring environment in some ways. So I really kind of loved that.
Doug, we understand that one of your novels, Bad Karma, is currently being made into a feature film. Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
My book, Bad Karma, that I did under a pen name, I purposefully did that under a pen name pretty much for fun, but also because I had gone to an editor, my editor at Pocket at the time, and I just said, oh, I'm going to do this book on such and such. And she said, well, that would be good, but that's not a Doug Clegg book. And I really got furious, and I really thought, that's ridiculous. If I have a story and I'm going to write it, it's a Doug Clegg book no matter what. She saw a certain construct as a Doug Clegg book. And I wanted to sort of rebel against that. And so what I did was I wrote this book and thought, I'm not going to think of my name on this. I am not going to think of anything like that. And I wrote it fairly quickly. It's a very short novel because I wanted to try a different kind of book, something a little more plot-driven, a little bit more just moving with the story and not stopping to think if I developed the characters more intensely, will that slow down the plot? And I just went for plot with Bad Karma. Coincidentally, it's the first book of mine being turned into a movie, so I kind of see that as, well, a very plot-driven story probably would make a very good movie.
Doug, could you tell us the reaction of your parents when you went to them and said, hi, Mom, hi, Dad, I'm a writer?
My mother, when I sold my first book, she first thought I was lying, which I never really did much in my family, but I think because I was considered the storyteller, I was considered a liar. And so she, for a full year, she did not believe that, Pocket, Simon & Schuster were publishing the first book, Goat Dance. And she, in fact, said to me, are you saying this just to make us feel better? And I was like, why would I do that? I don't care how you feel about that stuff. So, yeah, family's been unusual. I think that's something in common with a lot of horror writers, that there's some family break in there. Maybe it's with a lot of writers. I think writing is one of those things where people are afraid of revealing too much about their inner workings of their own lives. I actually believe that horror speaks to our culture. I actually think this is something I've never seen in the press to address with horror, which is I actually think horror fiction and horror movies address something very solid in our culture that no one is noticing, and that's that we live in a culture of repressed violence. And I really believe horror frees that through the imagination, and I think that's a really wonderful thing. I think that when people, and I've certainly heard this, the Columbine tragedy, which was terrible, but I doubt that had much to do with horror fiction or horror movies. I think it had more to do with the repression of some impulse someone had and not having a place to express that in a way that didn't involve a lot of death. I think that fiction, any kind of fiction, opens your imagination up to another world. And I think people need more of that than less of that. Writing does not come easily for me unless it's completely what I want to write, which is the work of my imagination, which turns into the work of horror. Often I think I'm writing about love. And I think that love and the failure of love is often what a horror novel is. And the metaphors are the monsters. The monsters are the things you can't see in the world that actually control our fates a little more than we think. And so I do think I'm a born horror writer.